Hi, this is Alexandra Kitty. Welcome to Clue IQ Chronicles, Crime, Code, and Clues. Today I'm going to talk about choosing a vibe. And the vibe I chose was Art Deco. And I'm also going to talk about the palette and the retro-futuristic feel of Clue IQ. So why is vibe essential to experience? Well, there's a lot of reasons. You actually understand the subtext well when the vibe of a company sets the scene. We talk about branding, but I don't like the phrase branding. That's a military concept that has not so empathy-based roots. Brand is how you hide the problems by having a facade. And this is not a facade. This is a deep experience. And it is an experience. Clue IQ is not just about the game. It's about the feel. It's about your different core literacies moving together to have, a very entertaining experience, but also a very informative one. So when I was setting out in the beginning, I knew what the color palette would be, but I hadn't decided on the look. So I went back and forth and thinking, okay, what do I want it to look like? And then when I decided to do the Elwell Enigma, because that's a true crime story that happened in the 1920s. That was Art Deco. And I really liked how the game turned out. And I thought, this is the vibe I like. So I went with Art Deco. So in the Elwell Enigma, it is Art Deco, but it's mostly a gold black look, very geometric, a lot of jazz influence. So I did not take the color palette from the Elwell Enigma, but I took everything else because when you're doing a historical piece, there's an importance to keeping the historic and period details in. So with the Elwell Enigma, there are a lot of references to other historical events that happened around the same time as Joseph Elwell's murder. And one of them was the fate of the New York State governor. Another was a terrorist attack that happened on Wall Street. So I took all these elements and added them into the game, and it gave a very immersive feel. And of course, there was music involved. So you're getting a feel of the jazz, you're getting a feel of the visuals. And part of that, because it was the first true crime game Clue IQ put out, I decided I was going to go with the Art Deco for an overall feel for the company. So I had the scaffolding of Art Deco. Very geometric, very emotional. Although it's clean, you get a certain feel with Art Deco that you don't with, let's say, Art Nouveau or Surrealism or any of the other art movements. And I think this, is, empirical, but it still has an emotional tug. So the next thing, I didn't want to use gold and black for my company. So what palette? Well, I already had decided on the palette before I decided on the core design. So I wanted black because of the noir elements. But what other colors was I going to go for? I went with neon teal and neon lime because that is what I would call a retro-futuristic. So I wanted a sort of an 80s interpretation of the future. So I'm blending different timelines here. The future, the distant past, and a centuries old past, with a little bit of a Victorian tinge as a nod to Sherlock Holmes. So colors in these colors, dark, of course, noir, blue and green, it's almost like a sea. You're wading into different kind of waters. And because it's neon, it's all about flash and light. So it's illuminating. So I had to pick and refine the colors, and I knew what I was going for. There were other choices. I could have gone for the four colors of alchemy: black, white, yellow, and red. And usually that would have been my go-to palette. Anybody who knows my stories when I did a Dangerous Woman story studio knows The World's Most Dangerous Woman. That was Magnus Blime's palette for when she was solving a case. Black when she heard a case, white when she was doing research, yellow when she was testing a theory, and then when she was ready to confront the villain, she always wore her red dress. And I wanted to break away from that. I said, let's do something different. And black, blue, and green, and a specific kind of blue and a specific kind of green conveys a different kind of message. And that's what I was going for. I wanted something a little different and memorable. And I do a lot of alcohol ink art, and the teals and the limes are my favorite colors. They just seem so much more vibrant. That's how I fell in love with those two colors together. And then when I brought this company to life, I wanted to add some of that to it. So I experimented until I saw the blue I wanted, exact teal I wanted, the exact lime I wanted. And I was very pleased with the result. But I also wanted to do hybrid motifs, as I've mentioned earlier. So retrofuturism, fusing the past with the present and future. And a lot of the artwork you'll notice for the games have that retrofuturistic vibe. Because we're using AI, we're definitely future forward. But also because we're talking about cases that happened in the past, we're looking back in time as well. And we're doing this in the present. So we're weaving the three chords, the past, present, and future together. And I wanted the aesthetic to represent that in different ways. So if you're looking at something like Circle of the Frozen Mind, you can see palette plays a significant role, as does in the Elwell Enigma and Frozen Secrets. You don't want to lose coherence. So if you're weaving different eras, you have to blend the styles. So something familiar with something different, so that people have something to anchor. They can recognize it. It becomes a map. The colors become, and the style becomes a roadmap, how to interpret the works. So you don't want too many colors. So I picked 3, and one black is a hue. The other 2 are colors, and I wanted to make sure that they were distinct and that each conveyed a message. And then I used the scaffolding clearly in the past, but everything else hinted at the future, from the technology we use to what we're doing with gaming. We're taking it to a totally different level. So we're not going in the past where gaming had to be fiction by default. We're saying, no, it can be nonfiction. It doesn't have to be just about games. You can learn, you can help, you can explore in a completely different way. So I wanted to make that clear, that it's not business as usual, but it has to be a consistent message throughout. So I wanted to make something very memorable. And when I began, I didn't use an Art Deco motif. That came a little later, but the colors were there. I wasn't going to change the color scheme because I liked how it looked. It was very mesmerizing. It was very hypnotizing, and yet it kind of snaps you and you can, focus on a certain point. So when you're doing this sort of thing, when you're creating a look, you have to be cognizant of all of these little things, and you're putting them together to the whole doesn't equal the sum of the parts. So that's a very, a Gestalt way of seeing things. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to give it layers upon layers. So each color has a purpose. Each image has a purpose. Each symbol, each logo has a deeper purpose. So you can study it and you can say, okay, this is the cohesion. This is what brings these elements together. So if you're making something new, you have to think about your color palette, because it immerses you. We have different emotional reactions to different colors. And each color has its own symbolism, its own backstory, its own history. And it's important to leverage. But also the style. You're looking at different chords of time. You're also looking at different places, but that's another story for another podcast. So I hope you enjoyed this shorter than usual podcast. Please like, share, and subscribe, comment. And next week, we're going to talk about translating nonfiction to gaming. That will be a little longer than this one. I did want to talk about the visuals and share that with you. So I will see you next week. Ta-ta for now.